All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to Board Talk. This is a series about ideas and practices for nonprofit board governance. I'm Seth Linden, the founder and principal of Gather Consulting, and once again, really good to see so many familiar faces and so many new ones as well. I really appreciate you all joining me today and joining us today. I was thinking about how to start today, and I just want to start with some gratitude for these bi-weekly talks. They're a great chance for me to connect with friends and colleagues and to reflect on what we're learning and experiencing with regard to nonprofit boards, and to be in community with one another during these difficult times. They provide a slight respite from the world that continues to burn under the global pandemics of COVID-19, racial injustice, and climate change. In today's uniquely scheduled Board Talk, 19 years after 9/11, we're fortunate to have the opportunity to learn with Jeff Solomon, the past president of the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Philanthropies. And he's going to shed light on philanthropy and board service pre and post 9/11 and how that compares to the current COVID pandemic. As you know, whoa, I should start with a quick norm. If there's some background, just make sure to mute. Cool. As you know, we just like to take a quick moment, a moment of silence to recognize all the healthcare professionals and teachers and first responders and other essential workers who are fighting for us every day and who cannot be in this Zoom room with us. So my hope, as always, is that the next hour is an engaging and experiential time together, learning, reflecting, and sharing our experiences and expertise on how boards might meet this moment by evaluating their executives in new ways. We'll discuss how boards might assess their executive during a global pandemic, how boards can adapt to virtual evaluations, and share some challenges and opportunities with virtual assessments. And because of this unique moment, we'll touch on philanthropy's response to COVID and how that compares to other world-changing events. Before we continue, what I love to do, I'm going to do something new, is get everyone's kind of fingers warm. Type in the chat how many board talks you've been to. So this could either be your first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. So I'm curious just to see, because I think we have a lot of new folks and a lot of recurring participants. Awesome. Just to get everyone's chat skills up and running before I continue on. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I try not to share too much so we can all see everyone's faces. But I do want to just go over real quickly the agenda. So we'll do some welcome and intros. I'll stop talking in a couple minutes. We'll do some reflections, small group breakouts, and then we get to interview Jeff Solomon today, again, past president of the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Philanthropies. And then we will close with some tips and next steps. The POP, the purpose, outcome, and process. Today we want to learn how boards might evaluate their chief executive in the COVID era. We want to connect virtually with new friends and colleagues, and we hope that after today you'll better understand and be able to prepare for executive evaluations. And we just went over that process again. Quickly, some Zoom norms that I like to go over. Pretty basic, but important. We want to use the chat to type questions. If you have any questions for me or Jeff or any of the other participants, throw those up in the chat. We're going to share, I've already shared a Google Doc with you, and I'll share that link again. That's going to be a space that we can all do some reflections together and kind of engage in a virtual conversation. If you do happen to be in a noisy background, just mute yourself. You don't have to over mute. And if you need to take a break.
You're going to have some criticisms. And we all...
Speaking of muting, okay, great. And then if you need to take a break, just turn your camera off so we know you're not there. The last thing just to underscore is this idea of equity of voice. And this can mean a lot of different things. On the one hand, it could mean, you know, don't speak twice until everyone has spoken once. It could mean if you're used to talking a lot, maybe sit back a little. If you're used to being quieter, maybe lean in a little. And it also can refer to this idea of letting historically silenced voices have the opportunity to speak first. So I'm now going to stop, and you guys, you all, have the opportunity now to do some intros. I'm just going to model this. What I'd love for everyone to do is just type their name in the chat, their pronouns, their role. I'm doing this as well. Their organization and their city into the chat. And this is just, again, another way for folks to just see people are calling in from all over the country. I know I was looking at the registration list. There are board chairs, there are board members, there are executive directors and CEOs, board liaisons, folks from Philly, from LA, Chicago, Brooklyn, all over. It's really nice. So as those kind of scroll in, I'll give you, for those who this is your first board talk, let me just give you 30 seconds on who I am and what Gather Consulting is. So I work with educators, board members, and foundations to provide advising and consulting on boards, philanthropy, and leadership. I have a special interest in community building and Jewish education. I really love gathering people and ideas together to strengthen community. I love network weaving, facilitating, thought partnering, coaching, and project managing passionate nonprofit leaders on challenging social projects. I'm going to call on a couple folks, and you don't know I'm going to call on you, just so we can get a few other voices in the room to make a couple quick intros. Daniel, I'm looking at you. Can you unmute yourself and just share who you are? And if you have a question that you're curious about, feel free to let that fly.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Kaufman. I'm a principal at Third Plateau. I live in Sacramento, California. And I am actually most interested in coming to this as a member of the executive committee of a board I sit on. And it's a nascent board, and we're struggling with how to most effectively evaluate our executive director. So this felt very, very timely.
Right on. Good to see you. Dominique, are you there? Can you introduce yourself? Or Dominique might have stepped away. If Dominique stepped away. How about Marty? Is it Marty Singerman? Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Marta Singerman.
Marta.
And if you look at the spelling, you would never know how to pronounce it. I am zooming in from Breckenridge, Colorado. I am the Secretary and Governance Chair of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. And I'm excited about today's presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Marta. And I'm going to call on one more person. I'm going to call on Deborah Katz. Mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Debbie Katz. I'm a search specialist at DRG, but I also sit on a couple of boards. So I'm coming at this from both those perspectives, and I'm curious to hear pretty much everything today. I'm always up for learning more.
Awesome. Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, everyone. So let me exit this full screen. I'm going to put in the chat box the Google Doc that I shared late last night or early this morning. And the first few minutes, I'm going to give you a sec. There you go. You go about like 4 or 5 minutes to click on that document and reflect, think about your experience on a board, running evaluations, and think about these 3 questions. And the three questions are: does your board have a written evaluation process for its chief executive? And if so, what is its purpose? Have you ever been part of an annual evaluation, virtual, in person? And if so, how was the experience? And if you have been part of a virtual evaluation, what worked well and what was most challenging? So this is a fun experiment. If you've never done this before, it can be a little bit disconcerting. you can start writing as you all are. What I'd ask is put your name or your initials and your role, so we know if you are responding as a board member, as an executive, and then you can feel free to reflect. And I'm going to give everyone 4 minutes, so until 12:16, 12:15, 12:16. So go for it and think and reflect on these questions, and then we'll circle back together. If you don't have access for whatever reason, you can send me a chat or an email. Okay. And if you don't have access, send me maybe there's another email that would work. Oh, here we go. I see all of your requests now. Getting through all of these. If there's a little background noise, just put yourself on mute. That would be great. So take about 2 more minutes. It'll take about 1 more minute. And if you're done, if you've reflected, you can start looking at what other people are writing or have written and see, does it resonate with you? Are you surprised by any other responses? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break us out into some small groups, and it's going to happen randomly. For those of you who've been in small groups, a chance for you to introduce yourself a little bit more. So please take a minute or 30 seconds to go around and share briefly a little bit more about who you are, what brings you here. And then I would pick a facilitator and a timekeeper. As you go around and share, think about kind of like what I just reflected on or shared. What surprises you around the reflections in that Google Doc? Was there anything, what specifically resonated with you? What other questions does that bring up? And this is just an opportunity to meet some other folks, share some personal experiences, ask some questions, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to give everyone 10 minutes for this. And let's see how quickly I can do this. There we go. Okay. Go for it. And you should see something that pops up on the screen that just says join the room. Hi, MR. Do you want to join a room?
I wasn't able to answer anything. I couldn't get access to the doc.
Do you want to chat with other folks?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Do you see that button on your screen?
No.
Let's try it again. Now do you see?
No.
Huh.
That's all right.
Okay.
I'll wait for everybody else to report back out.
Okay. Okay, I just gave you access, MR, just in case.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that. MR, how's Uncle Denny?
He's great. He actually sent a video this morning as part of he does a weekly reflection called TGIF, which we do for all of our company.
I remember.
He was having a meeting outside with Adam, and a bird landed on Adam's shoulder, flew off of Adam and sat on Dennis's hat and stayed with them for the whole hour of the meeting. It's crazy.
Nice.
But he looks really good. You know, really having a difficult time with, you know, the quarantine issues. As you know, he's a people person.
He
So-
is, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's enjoying the additional quiet time.
I think he's had enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's on Zoom all day long, and that's
Yeah.
driving him a bit crazy, as are most of us.
Yeah.
But no, he's more than ready to get back to the way things should be,
Yeah.
whenever that may be.
I can imagine that. I miss him. Yeah, it's been a while.
So are you in LA?
Yeah, I'm in Long Beach, just south of south of Los Angeles.
Yeah, what's happening with the fires wherever you are?
There's no fires. I mean, the sky is a bit smoky, and it's like a really gross kind of yellowish beige.
Mm.
But it's not. I mean, yeah, I think north of us, east of us, and of course in the Bay Area, it's incredible. It's much worse.
Mm.
So
I can't imagine.
yeah, it's just a wild time. A wild time.
Yeah.
You're in Providence, right?
No, actually, I'm in Pennsylvania.
Oh, you're in Pennsylvania. Oh, okay.
Yep. We all work from home now. I mean, well, we've been virtual for the past 10 years. So COVID didn't affect us from a business perspective in terms of the way we work. So that's been kind of nice because we didn't have to adjust to anything. You know, we've always been working from home. So certainly affecting our revenue in terms of school contracts because the schools aren't open, but you know, we're adjusting and doing a lot of online stuff, and you know, the kids have been great. You know, I think our model is it's perfect for this kind of a situation.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, the teachers all have great relationships with their kids, and we had in Australia, they had every single student in every school do an exhibition online. So
Wow.
it's been pretty cool. And we've had, I think once a month, Elliot's holding international Zooms. So people from all over the world are sharing, you know, their issues and their stories. And so in some ways it's kind of brought our network closer together, you
That's
know,
great.
because we're doing things we wouldn't normally do by
Mhm.
reaching out to people. So, so it has its good points.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. Hi, Dominique. I called on you, and you.
Sorry, I was on
All
another
good.
call.
It's all good. You next time. I'll get you next time. All right. People should just hop back on now.
Oh,
I know it's always frustrating. You're at that last sentence and then you just get cut off. If you all want to finish your last sentence together, you can. All right. Before we get to the main event, anyone, one or two people just want to share anything that they heard in their breakouts? Anything that was really interesting, really surprising?
I'll share. I mean, I think, you know, not surprising, but I think that we're all kind of feeling is how difficult it is to actually set goals this year. And for the next, you know, for the next going forward, I don't think, I think the feeling in our group, was a small group, is that virtual is not necessarily going to stop us from doing it well.
Mhm.
because it's quite an intimate setting, and we've hardly had anything to do with our CEOs and EDs over the last 6 months anyway, in terms of, one-on-one personal connection, but it's all been done through the virtual.
Yeah. That's a question I'm going to ask Jeff. So good observation. Anyone else want to share one quick observation?
I'd like to just quickly share that Bahrain has just announced full diplomatic relations with Israel.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Great news, Laura.
Sure. All right. Okay. Well, now we get, I get the very special pleasure, and we all get the special pleasure of being joined by Jeff Solomon. As I said, he's the past president of the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Philanthropies. He was the past senior vice president and COO of the UJA Federation in New York. I was thinking of how to explain kind of seed funder, founder, incubator of two of the most consequential Jewish programs in the last 20 years, Birthright and Reboot. Jeff and I became friendly when I was a program officer at the Jim Joseph Foundation for the past four plus years. In addition to being on the board of the Jim Joseph Foundation, Jeff is currently the vice chair of the Leash Tag Foundation in San Diego. He's on the board of the Kind Foundation and the Israel Policy Forum. And just one more, just 30 seconds. Jeff, I hope this isn't embarrassing, but you've been referred to a few times recently as a godfather in Jewish philanthropy. And I would say that's not too much hyperbole. Jeff, personally, I think you are a brilliant, committed, involved advocate for board service and corporate governance, strong culture, and organizational effectiveness. You've worked with hundreds of board members for, I imagine, nearly 40 years. And you're going to be able to give us multiple perspectives as a foundation president, as a philanthropic innovator, as a board member, as an author, and as a community organizer. So I really appreciate you being here with us today amidst everything going on. I'm going to ask you a handful of questions like we practiced for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we will open up the chat and the Zoom room for some other questions. That sound good?
Sounds good.
Great.
And it's great to see so many old friends from lots of different parts of the country.
Awesome. It's part of the nice part of these board talks. I'm going to start really broad but very relevant for today before we get into executive evaluation. So, like I mentioned, I think in the intro, you were living in New York and running the Bronfman Philanthropies during 9/11. So I'm curious if you can start just by reflecting on how that event affected your approach to philanthropy, and even just share briefly kind of what you did in response, or what the Bronfmans did in response to 9/11.
Sure, and I think there are so many more differences than there are similarities, and I actually sitting in my New York apartment right now, looking. We're on the 29th floor, looking down at the new World Trade Center. So it's and it's September 11th. 19 years ago, we lived a block and a half from the World Trade Center. And the first observation I would make is September 11th was about 3 hyper-local events in Shanksville, Washington, and New York, whereas the pandemic is about the most global event probably in our lifetime. And so, for those of us who were locally affected, we couldn't get back to our apartment for 2 months. We were allowed to go in with some National Guardsmen for 10 minutes to empty out the refrigerator and pick up our passports. But what Andy and Charles Bronfman and I were able to do, I actually was in Montreal on 9/11. By 9/13, we had the following conversation. As a New York domiciled foundation, what should we be doing? How much should we be giving? And there was excuse me, there was at the time, a fund set up by the New York Community Trust and the United Way. And that's where foundations were giving. And as Charles and I were talking about how much and should we use that fund, Andy kept saying, this is not what we should be doing. We should be using our unique skills to do something for survivors who lost somebody on 9/11. And what emerged from that conversation was something called the Gift of New York. And as much pride as a professional as I have in Birthright and Reboot and 2164 and Slingshot and all of these great, wonderful programs that we've incubated, the Gift of New York is the one that sears my soul still 19 years later. What we decided to do was to arrange for anybody who lost a family member to have available to them every artistic, sports, cultural, theatrical resource available as a gift from Christmas of 2001 through Easter of 2003 to try to help them through the healing process. And, and there's a wonderful biblical story about when Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. They're approaching the Sea of Reeds, and they can begin to hear the Egyptian horses chasing after them. And Moses goes to his elders and says, what do we do? And the elders think about it and say, we don't know. And now you can see the smoke rise from the desert floor as the Egyptians are getting closer. And in a last moment of desperation, Moses goes to his PR person and says, what should I do? And the PR person says, Moses, baby, it's really simple. You spread your arms, the sea will part, we walk through, we get to the other side, the sea comes together, they drown, real easy. And Moses says, can I do that? And the PR person says, I don't know, but if you do, I'll get you 6 pages in the Bible. Can we do that? Can we get every cultural venue, every sports venue to make themselves available? And indeed, between September 13th, when we started this discussion, and Christmas, when we launched, they all came together at the announcement of the creation of the Gift of New York. The president of the New York Mets, the president of the New York Giants, the chairman of Major League Baseball, of Major League Hockey, of the NFL, they all bought in. The League of Theaters all bought in. And what was so interesting is there was something that we could do to impact healing at that tragic moment. What we are facing with the pandemic is so much larger. And, what can philanthropy do? There's some amazing things going on, and I'm sure many of you are involved in some of those amazing things. But when it deals with the core issues at this particular moment in time, I'm not sure it's private philanthropy that has the resources to make it happen.
Thanks, Jeff. Can you share briefly anything that you've noticed differently in terms of philanthropy's response to this crisis versus 9/11? and then we'll get on to CEO evaluations.
You know, I think what we saw the Ford Foundation do is, in my view, a profile in courage to basically make the decision to mortgage the future because of the belief that this moment is so critical that the normal resources of a $11+ billion foundation was not going to be enough.
Mm-hmm.
Is something that is pretty remarkable. I think what we saw a group of the foundations in the Jewish community do by pooling their resources and putting together a $91 million fund is another example of not doing the typical thing, but really collaborating in ways and giving up some of the decision-making authority in order to work collaboratively.
Mm-hmm. Great. So folks are here, I think, especially to hear your wisdom and expertise around CEO evaluations. And it's got to be quite a challenging time to be an executive right now. Can you share some thoughts? You had some great ideas a couple weeks ago on how you evaluate your chief executive without spending a fortune. What are things to consider and things to avoid?
I think there are a few things to consider. One is, you know, one of the great rules of human resource management is there should never be surprises. There should be clarity about the relationship, and built into that should be the fact that there is a time set aside each year for CEO evaluation. My first experience with CEO evaluation was almost 40 years ago when I had taken a human service agency to the accreditation process of both the Commission on Accreditation of Rehab Agencies and the Joint Commission on the Accreditation of Healthcare Facilities. And one of their criteria is every employee is to have an evaluation, and the criterion actually spells out, including the CEO. And I had never been evaluated, and I went to my board chair, and I said, you know, in 2 weeks we've got the commission accreditors coming through, and there's this standard evaluation criteria, and you need to evaluate me. And his response, and he was a prominent labor attorney, and his response was, you know me, if you're not fired on a Friday, you're welcome to come back on Monday. All the rest is commentary. That was not very helpful. And ultimately, I had to write my own evaluation, and he signed it, and we had it in the file. But most CEOs are trying to do the best job that they can, and the more we can, as board members, provide them with the tools to be able to do that job, the better they will be able to do it. And so a true belief that we've manifested ourselves with in a couple of the boards that I sit on is an annual 360. I see on her treadmill my fellow governance committee member at the Jim Joseph Foundation, Laura Lauder. The governance committee is deals with all issues of both board governance and the evaluation of the CEO. And what we do is we basically, once every 3 years, bid out an external 360-degree evaluation. And by doing it once every 3 years, you amortize the costs over those 3 years, and it's not a huge expense. from a budgetary perspective, even for public charity. You know, private foundations tend to have more resources than public charities, but it's a very reasonable cost, and the return on that investment usually is really quite phenomenal. Because if for those of you who've been, let me just ask the question: how many of you have been the subject of a 360 evaluation? You could raise your hand. And in how many of you were surprised by some of the findings in the 360 evaluation? Practically everybody, you know, not everybody, but practically everybody who has been through a 360 finds things about themselves and their practice that they would not otherwise know. And to have your colleagues, your subordinates, your peers confidentially provide feedback to you is a gift, and should be seen as a gift, and very much is part of a way of improving one's practice.
Thanks, Jeff. A 360, just for folks. Jeff, do you want to just share real briefly what a 360 evaluation is for those who haven't had one?
Sure. You know, the 360 evaluation is one in which those who have any part of a 360-degree relationship with the CEO are able to provide feedback. And again, the nice part about using a third party is that the third party can assure the confidentiality of that feedback, the bringing together the themes of the feedback in a way that is very useful. But basically, it's, you know, for the CEO, it's members of the board, especially the officers with whom she or he works most closely. It's subordinate staff throughout the organization, both direct reports and people who are not direct reports. It's peers from other organizations that work collaboratively with that CEO. And it is a very useful technique. Again, the approach that we've taken in a couple of situations is to do that externally once every 3 years, and internally, and this is where board members who are volunteers can manage that process themselves. There's enough written on 360 evaluations where in the intervening years, a board member or board members on the committee that is doing the evaluation will interview some of the other board members, some of the staff, and peers to put together an evaluation that may not be quite as comprehensive as one done by a third party, but is still valuable. And especially if you have a good third-party evaluation every 3 years, there are themes that emerge. And many of those themes really fall back to the question of, can you identify the goals and objectives of the CEO? And the healthiest organizations are organizations where you can see a straight line from their mission and vision to their goals and objectives, to their annual plan, to the CEO's objectives. Those are, too often, those are seen as totally separate documents and are very much siloed within the organization. Strategic planning people deal with it, but if you integrate them, you really can see a straight line that runs through the organization, including the performance objectives of the CEO.
Thanks, Jeff. And if folks, I appreciate you sending some questions. Feel free to start populating the chat either privately or to everyone, share them with everyone, any questions, and I'll try to lift some up for Jeff. Jeff, we heard a question earlier just about goals, about goal setting. And can you talk about in this virtual setting, how do you help your executives set goals virtually?
The same way as if we weren't virtual.
Say more.
Clearly we are human beings, and I think many of us during this strange time miss hugs more than anything else, and hugs of our colleagues and people who are not necessarily our family, but people with whom we share values and share work. But we are at a moment when the world isn't stopping. And so while it's, it is more typical to have those conversations between a board chair and a CEO or an HR chair and a CEO in person, there's no reason why they can't be done virtually. I believe it's just a question of trying to set it up as close to reality as the virtual world allows us to. So whether it's Microsoft Meet or Zoom or FaceTime, there are enough mechanisms that allow us to have one-on-one meetings, as well as larger meetings.
Can you can you share some questions, some good questions that you found over the years that you like to ask executives to help them reflect on their goals or to help them reflect on their year? What are some good questions that we can use in our toolkit?
One of the things that I like to do is to ask a CEO to begin the process with a self-evaluation. And it's, and I don't, I'm not trying to use a self-evaluation as a check mark for the file. It really doesn't have to go into the file. It's really an opportunity for a CEO to reflect on her or his performance, which, number one, it's a terribly, EQ is more important than IQ in CEO performances, and having a realistic sense of self is really valuable, and being able to write a self-evaluation and then get feedback about that, I have found to be a very useful process, both on the receiving side and on the, if you will, supervising side or oversight side.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Deborah, I like your question that you have in here. Do you want to share that with Jeff and with everyone?
Sure. I said, I'd like to see some self-reflection built into the process, asking ourselves as board members, have we done our best to set our CEO up for success to reach these goals? So my question really is, have you seen that done, and how would you suggest a board do that successfully and, most importantly, honestly?
I've only seen it done rarely, and perhaps the best example of where I saw it done was in a fairly young board that was very focused on, in terms of its mission, on talent development and talent retention, and used an outside evaluator to take a look at its own behavior, and the other time that I saw it done, which was not nearly as effective, but quite amusing, I can say years later, was at the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Philanthropies. You know, we were a living donor foundation, and one of the great demarcations in foundation life is those that have living donors and those that have more traditional boards no longer dealing with living donors. And our executive committee were the Andrea and Charles Bronfman and myself, and I proposed that we have an external evaluation of the foundation done. 90% of foundations require external evaluations of programs. Only 5% have external evaluations of their own performance. And we engaged a very reputable firm with some great people. It was very expensive. It was a mid six-figure number. And when it came time to the exit interview, there were some very critical things said about the way the three of us functioned as an executive committee. And after the exit interview was over, I was razzed for any number of months about, we spent $400,000 for a proctologist to come in and do that to us. And, you know, ironically, it turned out for the good, because the foundation went through a financial crisis in the early 2000s. And much of what we learned from that experience guided the way we rebuilt the foundation afterward.
Very cool. I see a few questions here, and I was looking at the attendance of folks. You know, there's a lot of folks running or on boards of much smaller nonprofits, right? So curious, maybe in the last couple minutes, if you can share, you know, any final thoughts or parting wisdom for smaller organizations in terms of how to adjust their sails to meet the kind of the winds of the storm that we're all facing right now.
And what I'm about to say is really hard to appreciate when you're a social entrepreneur starting with a small organization without any confidence in the sustainability of your funding sources, and you know, and suddenly you learn that you have to have a board, so you have your sister-in-law and your cousin become your board. And the one observation that I would make is, while businesses start on the basis of friends and family, the sooner, as a small, new, innovative organization, the sooner you basically take the lessons of the not-for-profit field in terms of serious governance and a serious board process, the faster your organization will grow. You know, when you're starting up, you feel like you have no resources available to you. And yet the observation I would make, having been involved in many startups, is those that bite the bullet early on in terms of serious governance, regular board meetings, having the board set policy, making sure that the founder, entrepreneur sees herself or himself as a servant leader, all lead to faster and more sustainable success.
Awesome. Thank you. we have 2 minutes left. I'm going to be able to stay on for another 15 minutes. I'm going to share one last thing for those who need to pop off. We usually spend a little bit more time, but these are some, whoops. I'm going to send this out via email as well. But I just wanted to share a few things that Jeff and I had talked about and a few tips that I've learned over the years, running a nonprofit, being on a board, serving as a foundation program officer. I think if there's anything here really just to lift up in this last minute or so, I'd say I'd actually highlight a couple things. One, number 7, I think, discussing kind of organizations, diversity, equity, and inclusion work and what the executive is doing to bring their board along in the movement for racial justice, I think is more important than ever now. And I'd say number 9, just using executive evaluation to strengthen the chair-CEO partnership. There's rarely anything more important than the partnership between the executive and the board chair, and thinking about honesty and vulnerability and transparency, like Jeff had said, around that partnership is very important, and it's a great opportune time around evaluations to do that. I'm just going to say in this last minute, thank you, Jeff, very much for your time. Thank you for all your service over the years. I appreciate your mentorship. I appreciate you taking the time today. And our last board talk will be in 2 weeks, Friday, September 25th, with Gamal Palmer on recruitment with a DEI lens. And Gamal is a senior vice president at the LA Federation. And in parting, before you all hop off, think about, and I'll send more stuff afterwards, think of what you learned today. Think if there's someone you want to reach out to. You will get the emails of everyone. You will get this presentation you'll get the recording, and you'll get those tips. And hopefully this was a valuable time being together. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone. And have a great and safe weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.